The iron gates of Frosthold opened to cast Elara Vey into the storm, and every wolf on the wall began to howl. Chancellor Varek stood beneath the arch. By decree of the Winter Council, Elara Vey is stripped of rank and shelter for weakening the eastern wards. A guard tore the silver engineer's chain from her throat. One link cut her skin, but the pain was smaller than the truth behind it. Frosthold had trusted her mind whenever towers cracked. Now that her warnings threatened powerful men, her knowledge had become treason. When she demanded an audit of missing ward crystals, Varek called her unstable. 3 days later, her seal appeared on the sabotage order. Elara did not beg. Riven, her ash-black wolf, pressed against her leg. He had spent the night outside her cell and refused food. The pack at her feet held enough bread for one person. Most would belong to him. Commander Caelan Thorne waited beside the gate. For 3 winters, he had stood beside Elara inside failing towers. During the North Spire collapse, he followed her into a burning conduit. Once, when her hands shook from exhaustion, he held the lamp until dawn. She had believed his silence meant trust. Now she understood it could mean cowardice. "You reviewed the evidence," she said. "I did. And found no reason to question it?" His eyes met hers. His face remained controlled, but his hand tightened around the supply pack. There. One fracture in the calm. He knew enough to doubt her guilt. Caelan held out the pack. When she took it, he did not release the strap at once. The southern road reaches Ashmere before nightfall. Ashmere lay 9 miles beyond the wards. Nightfall was 3 hours away. "You once told me the shortest road is not always the safest." The words belonged to another winter, when he had listened. Elara pulled the pack from his hand. "You chose quiet over truth. I chose to prevent panic. No, you chose who would pay for it." For one breath, Caelan looked as though he might follow. He did not. The gates closed. Wind drove ice through Elara's cloak beyond the wards. She had helped design those barriers and believed law could protect people from power. That faith died quietly. Riven stumbled. Elara knelt and found blood on one paw. She tore a strip from her sleeve, bound the cut, and placed bread inside his collar. "You should have stayed inside," she murmured. Riven pressed his muzzle against her wrist. He had chosen her without decree or proof. They continued south until the road vanished beneath drifts. Then Riven pulled toward a frozen slope veiled by black pines. "Wrong way, Riven." He dragged harder. The road offered exposure. The trees offered shelter. Elara followed him. At the mountain's base, Riven threw back his head and howled. The sound entered the stone. Something answered. A deep pulse rolled beneath Elara's boots, like a buried heart remembering how to beat. Riven clawed at the snow. Elara dug until her numb fingers struck an iron ring. She pulled. Snow collapsed inward, revealing a black stone door carved with symbols older than the Dominion. Dry, warm air breathed softly through the seam. Every royal map marked this mountain as solid rock. Riven pressed his nose against the exile order and snarled. Elara drew out the parchment. The council seal shimmered, and black frost spread from Caelan's signature across her forged confession. The door opened beneath her hand. Silver channels descended into a circular chamber. At its center stood a stone hearth, large enough to warm a fortress. Hundreds of sleeping alcoves lined the walls, a refuge built for an entire city. Elara stood silent. Behind her waited the kingdom that had stripped away her name. Before her stood proof that someone had prepared for a winter the crown had forgotten. Riven leaned against her knee. Elara stepped onto the central platform and placed both palms against the hearth. Words ignited beneath her boots. One voice may ask, Many truths must answer. I will not let him die, she said. The stone remained cold. Then hundreds of sealed doors began knocking beneath the mountain. The knocking beneath the mountain stopped the moment Elara lifted her hands from the hearth. Silence returned, deeper than before. Riven stood beside the central platform with his ears raised toward the sealed passages. Elara took the lantern from the wall and followed the nearest silver channel into a corridor lined with iron doors. Most were locked from the other side. No dust covered the handles, yet no footprints marked the floor. Something had awakened when she spoke. It had not answered her. A weak cry echoed from the entrance tunnel. Elara turned at once. Riven reached the outer door before her and growled at the scent beyond it. When Elara pulled the iron ring, the storm forced snow through the opening. 3 figures collapsed across the threshold. An elderly man carried a girl wrapped in a torn cloak. Behind him crawled a woman whose fingers had turned blue beneath cracked gloves. The Hollowmere ward fell, the man gasped. The heat stones went dark before sunrise. Hollowmere lay 4 miles east. Its ward should have survived another decade. Elara looked toward the sleeping hearth. Its remaining warmth was barely enough for herself and Riven. 3 more bodies would drain it faster. The child opened her eyes. Please. Elara had heard that word outside Frosthold's gates. She had refused to speak it because she knew no one would answer. Bring them inside. She shut the door against the storm and led them toward the central chamber. The woman began crying when she felt the faint warmth rising from the floor. Elara did not promise safety. She inspected their hands, wrapped the girl in her own blanket, and divided the remaining bread into 5 portions. Riven received the smallest. He stared at her until she pushed half of her share toward him. I need you alive, she whispered. While the newcomers rested, Elara studied the words beneath the hearth. One voice may ask. Many truths must answer. 4 narrow depressions circled the platform. Each was shaped for a human hand. The old man introduced himself as Elara Vey, a miller. His daughter Mara lay beside him, too weak to stand. The child was his granddaughter, Nessa. This place requires vows, Elara said. Not loyalty, not obedience, truth. Oren looked uneasily at the dead hearth. Truth about what? What you will give without being forced. Elara established the rules before desperation could establish worse ones. Food would be divided equally. Rank meant nothing underground. No one could claim another person's labor, body, or oath as payment for shelter. Anyone free to leave was free to refuse the hearth. Mara dragged herself upright. And if we refuse? You remain under my protection until the warmth fails. Elara placed her palm into the first depression. I will maintain this refuge while I still have the strength to do so. Oren took the second. I will share what food I possess and hide none from the others. Mara pressed trembling fingers into the third. I will care for every child here as I care for my own. Nessa reached the final place. I will tell when I am afraid. For a breath, nothing happened. Then silver light raced through the floor. The Moonhearth opened like an enormous eye. Heat struck the chamber in a slow wave. Ice cracked across the water basin. Ancient channels glowed beneath the walls, and warm mist rose toward the ceiling. Nessa laughed once before collapsing. Alara's legs gave way with hers. The hearth had taken warmth directly from their bodies. Her fingers went numb. Oren's lips turned pale, and Mara curled around her daughter as violent shivering seized them all. The refuge had not created heat. It had gathered, multiplied, and redistributed what they willingly surrendered. Elara forced herself upright and adjusted the vents until fresh air moved through the chamber. Gradually, the warmth returned to their skin. By nightfall, the storm had buried the entrance again. Then Riven growled. Heavy blows struck the outer door. Elara climbed the tunnel with a lantern in one hand and an iron bar in the other. When she opened the entrance, Commander Caelan Thorne stood outside with 6 wounded guards behind him. His black armor was covered in ice. By emergency authority, he said, I am claiming this refuge for the Winter Guard. Elara blocked the entrance. There is no commander beneath this mountain. His gaze moved past her toward the silver glow below. People will die if you keep us outside. I know. She looked at the insignia fastened over his heart. Remove it. The soldiers stared. Caelan did not move. If you enter, Elara said, you enter without rank. You obey the same rules as everyone else. No forced service, no royal claim, no command over the hearth. The storm howled behind him. Slowly, Caelan unfastened his silver wolf insignia and placed it in the snow. Inside the chamber, Elara showed him the empty depression beside the hearth. Speak only what is true. Caelan placed his hand against the stone. I will obey the laws of this refuge while I remain beneath its protection. The hearth brightened. Then a thin vein of black frost appeared beneath his palm. The black frost beneath Caelan's palm vanished when he lifted his hand, but Riven did not stop growling. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the commander. I spoke the truth, Caelan said. Perhaps, Elara answered, but not all of it. The wounded guards still looked to Caelan before sitting or accepting treatment. Elara felt the old order rebuilding around him. She stepped onto the platform. Under this mountain, no one waits for a commander's permission to survive. Caelan looked at his men. You heard her. It was the first order he gave beneath the mountain, and it surrendered authority instead of claiming it. By morning, the refuge had begun to feel inhabited. Oren measured grain into equal portions. Mara boiled water over a heat vent while Nessa folded blankets beside her. Riven accepted dried meat from the child while watching Caelan. Elara found him carrying vent stones beside his soldiers, stripped of armor and insignia. When one guard called him commander, Caelan answered, Not here. Elara hated that part of her noticed. It did not erase Frosthold, but change was harder to dismiss when it cost a man rank and obedience. Riven brushed against her knee. Elara rested a hand on his neck, grounding herself in something simpler than forgiveness. She spent the next hours tracing silver conduits through the western wall. Some carried warmth, others water or air, converging near doors marked with symbols missing from every royal manual. Riven scratched at a mineral-crusted panel. Elara forced her knife into the seam. The panel opened onto a descending stair. Caelan appeared with a lantern. He held it behind her left shoulder, as during the north spire collapse, keeping the light from her eyes. The familiarity unsettled her. You should not go alone, he said. I survived your judgment alone. I know. Do you? His grip tightened around the lantern. I knew the evidence was incomplete. You knew enough to stop the sentence. Yes. Then why didn't you? Because the Eastern wards were failing, the court was near panic, and I believed one unjust order could prevent a wider collapse. And now? Now I know I protected the structure that was failing instead of the person telling me why. He did not ask forgiveness. That made the admission harder to dismiss. The stair ended in an ancient workshop. Tools hung in careful rows, copper drafting plates covered the walls, and weather-sealed ledgers lay across a central table. Elara opened the first volume. Moonhearth channels spread across the page. Not one refuge. Dozens. Each settlement had once possessed an independent hearth linked to the others through underground thermal lines and vow chambers. No palace stood at the center. No military post controlled access. Elara's fingers tightened around the page until the old hide creased. For 6 years, she had repaired royal hearths beneath guard towers and been taught that survival required command, Every calculation she trusted rested on a deliberate lie. Caelan read the warning beneath the diagrams. Forced vows fracture the heat. Command-bound promises produce dead frost. No ruler may own what all must freely sustain. This was reversed, Elara said, by the crown, by people who knew what they were destroying. Above them, Nessa laughed, as Riven chased a wooden cup across the chamber. The sound drifted down the stair and made the workshop feel less like a tomb. A guard arrived carrying a sealed dispatch tube recovered from Caelan's cloak. Caelan broke it open. His face changed. What is it? Varek sealed every archive concerning pre-Dominion engineering 6 hours before you found this place. Riven barked behind a stack of vent plates. They uncovered an alcove filled with empty crystal crates. Most bore faded royal markings. 3 carried black wax stamped with a sun split by a blade. Caelan went still. Elara saw recognition, then anger, then shame. Whose seal? Varek's private ration authority. He lifted one broken lid. The shipping date matched the week Elara first reported the missing ward crystals. Caelan closed his eyes. He used my soldiers to move them. Elara placed the lid beside the ledgers, then helped me record everything he thought no one would ever find. This time, Caelan followed without being told. The first ward failed before dawn. Elara felt it through the Moonhearth as a violent shudder beneath the floor. Silver light vanished from one western channel, and every water basin in the refuge trembled. A second failure followed before sunrise. Then a third. By midday, people were pounding on the buried entrance. Elara opened the door to find families climbing through the storm from 3 separate settlements. Some carried bundles, others carried nothing. A mother held an infant beneath her cloak, while an old man dragged a boy whose boots had frozen to his feet. More figures moved through the white distance behind them. Caelan looked past Elara toward the approaching crowd. If we admit them all, the hearth may fail. If we leave them outside, they will. That is not an argument. It is the only one that matters. Elara ordered the doors opened. The refuge changed within an hour. Sleeping alcoves filled. Wet cloaks crowded the entrance tunnel. Children cried from hunger, while frightened adults demanded to know who controlled the food. No one controls it, Elara said. We account for it. She divided the sanctuary into work circles. Orin measured grain. Mara organized the injured. Caelan's former guards cleared ventilation shafts and carried water without weapons. Every adult capable of standing received a task, but shelter was not made conditional on labor. The Moonhearth required new vows to support the growing population. Elara refused to gather everyone into one circle. Small groups, she ordered. Specific promises. Nothing sworn to a ruler, clan, or commander. Caelan studied the darkening channels. You think someone will force the words? I think frightened people repeat whatever once kept them fed. Near the rear chamber, a woman named Sela began arguing with Orin over the ration count. She had arrived from Dustford with 2 children and a strip of black cloth tied around her wrist. Elara recognized Varek's ration mark. Where did you receive that? She asked. Sela hid her wrist. At the southern depot. What did they require in return? The woman looked toward her children. Only an oath. What oath? That Chancellor's soul would hold first claim over our labor, grain, and loyalty until the emergency ended. Caelan's expression sharpened. Duskford refused his permanent ration charter. Sela nodded. Our ward went dark 3 nights later. The room seemed to narrow around Elara, Hollowmere, Duskford, the lower river settlements. All had resisted Varek's contracts. A cry came from the entrance tunnel as another group arrived. Among them was a thin young clerk wearing the torn blue sash of the Winter Council. He saw Caelan and stopped. Commander. Caelan did not correct him quickly enough. The clerk reached inside his coat and withdrew a water-stained document. I carried copies of the hearing records before the archives were sealed. Elara held out her hand. The pages contained reports from 3 engineers who had questioned the evidence against her. One noted that her seal had been applied after the Eastern Ward failure. Another identified a mismatch between her measurements and the figures on the sabotage order. At the bottom of the final page stood Caelan's authorization, sentence approved despite unresolved discrepancies. Elara read the line twice. Around them, the refuge continued moving. Bowls scraped against stone. Children whispered. Riven paced near the vow chamber. You saw these reports, she said. Caelan's silence answered first. I saw summaries. Enough to know the evidence was disputed. Yes. And you signed anyway. The council believed delay would cause unrest. The council did not hold the pen. His face remained still, but she saw the strain beneath it. No. You did. A warmer answer might have hurt less. An excuse could have given her something simple to hate. Instead, he stood before her and accepted the shape of what he had done. I believe the wards would hold once the court regained control, he said. I believe there would be time to reopen your case. You sent me into a killing storm and planned to correct it later? I was wrong. Elara folded the record carefully. Do not use truth as if it were payment. I am not asking you to forgive me. Good. A scream cut through the chamber. Black frost burst from the eastern vow circle. Several Dustford refugees had placed their hands on the hearth and repeated the loyalty oath required by Varek's depot. Dark veins raced through the floor, crawling beneath sleeping mats and food stores. Elara moved before anyone else. Break the circle. Hands off the stone. The refugees tried to pull away, but the frost had sealed their palms to the platform. Caelan reached for one man. Don't touch it, Elara warned. He stopped. She shut the silver gate, controlling the eastern heat channel. Warmth vanished from 1/3 of the refuge, and people cried out as cold descended over them. Elara drove an iron vent key beneath the first frozen hand and broke the connection. Caelan followed her instructions, separating the others without touching the corrupted stone. The black frost continued spreading. Riven leaped across the channel and lowered his muzzle to the floor. No, Elara said. The wolf inhaled. Dark vapor rose from the stone and entered his lungs. The frost retreated from the sleeping chambers, gathering beneath his black fur instead. Riven staggered. Elara caught him as he collapsed beside the hearth. Black ice formed over his ribs. His eyes found hers once. Then they closed. The black ice over Riven's ribs did not melt when Elara carried him closer to the Moonhearth. It spread. Thin, dark branches crawled beneath his fur, pulsing each time someone whispered an oath in the chamber. Elara laid him on a cloak and pressed both hands against his sides. His heartbeat was steady, but slow. Tell me what to do, Nessa whispered. Elara looked at the child, then at the refugees watching from the cold section. Stop promising what you do not choose. She ordered every vow circle closed. No one would touch the hearth until she understood the corruption. The decision reduced heat across the sanctuary, but the black frost stopped advancing. Caelan knelt opposite her. Can the hearth draw it out? Not without another place to send it. His gaze lowered to Riven. Then he carried it for them. He carried what they were forced to speak. Elara opened the ledgers beside the wolf and searched every reference to dead frost. Oren kept the lantern steady. Mara warmed cloth over a vent and replaced it across Riven's paws. Even Sela, whose coerced oath had helped trigger the contamination, refused to leave. Elara found a note between 2 airflow diagrams. Beasts who hear truth beneath words may draw corruption from the stone. Each taking binds the poison more deeply to the listener. Her hand tightened on the page. Riven had not merely detected the false oath. He had accepted its consequence. "How many times?" Caelan asked. "As many as his body survives." The answer silenced the room. Elara traced the affected channel back to the Duskford refugees. One by one, she questioned them not about loyalty, but about what had happened at Varek's depot. Food had been placed behind iron bars. Parents were required to swear first claim of labor, grain, and obedience to the Chancellor before their children were fed. Those who refused received nothing. Sella pulled the black ration cloth from her wrist. "They called it voluntary." Caelan's mouth hardened. "Because no blade touched your throat." "Hunger was the blade," Elara said. A guard brought the shipping record found inside one crystal crate. Caelan spread it beside the refuge map while Elara compared dates. Holomir's crystals had been removed 9 days before its ward failed. Dustford's were transferred 6 days before darkness reached its towers. The lower river settlements showed the same pattern. Every shipment ended at a depot controlled by Varek. Every failed settlement had rejected his permanent ration charter. "This is not preparation," Caelan said. "It is conquest without an army." Elara looked toward the crowded alcoves. Varek did not need to seize villages if winter frightened them into surrendering themselves. Behind the workshop table, Riven began scratching weakly at the floor. Elara followed him and cleared dust from a circular copper plate. Beneath it lay a second map, etched into black stone. Lines spread from the mountain in every direction. At their ends, marks showed Holomir, Dustford, the river settlements, and places whose names had vanished from modern records. Each possessed its own hearth chamber. The First Moonhearth was not a solitary refuge. It was the heart of a buried network. Caelan studied the dormant lines. If these exist, the settlements would not need Varek's depots. They would not need anyone's permission to survive. Elara felt the meaning settle through her. Until that moment, her goal had been to keep one shelter alive, to ration heat, to protect whoever reached the door. That was no longer enough. Varek had built his power on isolation, one failing ward at a time, one starving family at a time. The answer was not to defend a single hidden hearth. It was to wake all of them. A horn sounded through the mountain. A guard returned from the entrance carrying a proclamation sealed in black wax. By Varek's order, food and heat crystals would now be issued only to citizens who signed loyalty contracts. Caelan looked at Elara. "He is moving faster. So will we." She placed her hand on the network map. Riven forced himself upright beside her, black frost shining beneath his fur. Then one dormant line beneath Elara's palm answered with a pulse of silver light. The silver line beneath Elara's palm faded before it reached Holomir. The network had answered, but something was blocking it. By morning, Caelan had made his decision. "The original ward inventories are still in Frosthold," he said. "So are the engineers who questioned your exile. If I can bring back either, Varek loses control of the story. You may not come back." "I know." Elara looked toward the black frost beneath Riven's fur. "And if this is another choice you intend to correct later?" Caelan did not defend himself. "Then judge me by what returns, not by what I promise." He left through a maintenance passage with 2 former guards. For several hours, Elara kept herself occupied with the refuge. The grain supply would last 8 days at current portions. Cedar reserves were lower than expected. 2 water channels had begun freezing near the outer chambers. By dusk, Caelan had not returned. Instead, horns sounded beyond the mountain. A royal proclamation was nailed to the buried entrance. Commander Caelan Thorne arrested for desertion, theft of crown records, and conspiracy with the traitor Elara Vey. Below the charge was a second declaration. Elara had stolen royal crystals, created the Black Frost through forbidden vows, and imprisoned civilians beneath the mountain. The lie was carefully built around fragments of truth. The crystals were inside her refuge. Black frost had appeared beneath her hearth. People were unable to leave because the storm had sealed the roads. Varek did not need the accusation to be perfect. He needed it to be believable. Whispers spread through the sanctuary before Elara returned to the central chamber. We were told this place was safe. What if the frost is hers? Why did the commander leave? Perhaps he escaped before it failed. That question struck deeper than Elara expected. She remembered Caelan's hand refusing to release the supply pack at Frosthold. His confession in the workshop. His promise that she should judge what returned. Nothing had returned. Riven rose unsteadily beside her, sensing the change in her breathing. Elara rested her fingers against his neck. "No," she whispered, though she was unsure whether she spoke to him or herself. "We do not build truth from fear." She ordered every food crate opened. Every grain sack was weighed in public. Every heat reserve, medicine bundle, lantern, crystal fragment, and length of cedar was recorded on the central wall. Oren read the totals aloud while Mara invited anyone capable of counting to verify them. "No private inventory," Elara announced. "No hidden ration. No order that cannot be questioned." A man from Dustford stepped forward. "And if we decide you should surrender the hearth? You may argue it before everyone. Would you obey? I would show you what surrender would cost." She placed Varek's forged proclamation beside the ancient engineering records and the shipping manifests. Dates were aligned, seals were compared, witnesses signed beneath each finding. Some suspicion remained, but it no longer moved unseen. Varek had expected secrecy to defend itself. Elara gave him none. Outside, royal soldiers blocked the mountain roads. They stopped refugees traveling toward the sanctuary and redirected them to ration camps where loyalty contracts waited beside empty bowls. Those already beneath the mountain began receiving messages from relatives trapped outside. The pressure became personal. A mother demanded that Elara trade the First Moonhearth for her sons. A guard accused her of sacrificing villages to preserve her own authority. 2 vow circles fractured when contributors withdrew their promises. The hearth dimmed. Its silver channels did not turn black. They simply weakened, as if truth spoken without trust carried less warmth. Elara stood before the central stone and understood the danger. The vows were not lies. They were incomplete. People could promise labor while expecting betrayal. They could promise protection while planning escape. The hearth heard division even when every word was technically true. A horn sounded 3 times from above. A scout descended the entrance tunnel, breathless. "Varek is coming." "How many soldiers?" "Nearly 200. The refugees recoiled. The scout swallowed. "The soldiers are not the worst of it." Behind Varek's army marched hundreds of starving civilians from the ration camps. He was bringing Elara an impossible choice. Surrender the hearth or let the entire kingdom watch its people freeze outside her door. The answer waited inside the oldest chamber. Elara found the door behind the Moonhearth, sealed beneath layers of mineral frost. Unlike the others, it carried no royal crest, only a circle of joined hands carved around a broken crown. Riven stopped before it. The black frost beneath his fur pulsed once. Elara placed her palm against the stone. The door opened. Inside stood 12 narrow pillars arranged around a basin of silver glass. Faint voices moved beneath its surface, not words exactly, but preserved intention. Vows remembered by the mountain. Oren, Mara, and 3 engineers followed her inside as witnesses. Elara refused to enter alone. Nothing important would be discovered without record again. She touched the basin. Light rose around them. Figures appeared in pale fragments, engineers in plain winter robes, families carrying food into underground chambers, village elders placing their hands upon separate hearths. A woman's voice emerged from the glow. "No crown shall hold the only fire," another answered. "Each refuge shall govern itself. Each shall share excess warmth freely. No settlement shall kneel for food, shelter, or survival." The images shifted. Soldiers entered the chambers. Command seals were pressed into the hearths. Engineers were dragged away. Their cooperative vows were replaced with loyalty oaths sworn to the crown. Then the silver light turned black. Elara stepped back. The First Moonhearth had never failed royal command by accident. It had been built to resist it. The crown had not discovered the system. It had conquered it. A messenger arrived through the maintenance tunnel before Elara could speak. He wore no uniform and carried a strip of cloth marked with Caelan's blood. "He sent this from the holding cells," the man said. Inside the cloth was a folded confession and a copy of an ancestral record from House Thorne. Caelan's forefathers had led the seizure of the original refuges. They had learned that command-bound vows created black frost, then concealed the weakness while converting the system into military infrastructure. At the bottom, Caelan had written in his own hand, "I saw discrepancies in Elara's case. I signed because I believed disorder would kill more people than one unjust sentence. I was not deceived into that choice. I made it." Elara read the line twice. There was no plea beneath it. No request for mercy. Only responsibility. Mara watched her carefully. "Does it change anything?" "It changes what he is willing to admit." "That was not my question." Elara folded the confession. "No, it does not restore what he broke." But anger no longer stood alone inside her. Something more difficult had entered beside it. The knowledge that Caelan was finally choosing truth where it could destroy him. The engineers examined the vow imprints while Elara returned to the network map. The dormant lines were bound by command seals placed over generations. To reconnect them, every refuge would need a voluntary vow circle at the same moment, and enough heat to break the seals. "How much?" Orin asked. Elara calculated twice. "More than this hearth can produce." "Then it cannot be done." "It can." She looked toward the black command marks embedded in the network lines. But the stored authority inside those seals must be released, not redirected. One engineer went pale. Breaking all of them at once could drain the mountain's geothermal core. The refuge fell silent. If the activation failed, the hidden hearths would die permanently. The soil above them would freeze. Rivers would lock beneath ice. Entire settlements could become uninhabitable. A horn sounded from beyond the mountain. Varek's army had reached the lower ridge. Through the entrance shaft came his amplified voice. "By emergency law, the First Moonhearth will be transferred to Crown Authority. All refugees who submit will receive food and protection." Elara walked back to the central chamber. People crowded around the hearth, frightened and waiting. She understood now why the original engineers had erased every central throne from their designs. One person could not be trusted with the only source of life. Not Varek. Not the crown. Not even her. Elara placed Caelan's confession beside the evidence ledger. "We are not defending this mountain," she said. The room quieted. "We are going to awaken every refuge Varek buried." Riven rose beside her, though black frost still covered his ribs. Then the Moonhearth revealed the final warning beneath the network map. "If the first fire fails, none shall burn again." Varek intended Caelan's hearing to be an execution performed with words. The great hall of Frosthold was filled before sunrise. Officers stood beneath wolf banners, while council scribes waited with prepared confessions. Caelan entered in chains, stripped of armor, but still carrying the silver command seal of House Thorne against his chest. Varek watched from the raised tribunal. You abandoned your post during a national emergency, he said. You stole restricted records, aided a convicted traitor, and endangered the Dominion's only lawful supply system. Caelan looked across the officers who had once obeyed him without question. I left my post, he said. A murmur passed through the hall. Varek smiled faintly. Then you confess. I confess that I approved Elara Vey's exile despite unresolved evidence. The smile disappeared. Caelan continued before the council could silence him. 3 engineers challenged the timing of her seal. The ward measurements did not match her calculations. I saw enough to delay the sentence. Varek rose. You were given evidence of sabotage during a public crisis. I was given uncertainty. I treated it as guilt because certainty was politically convenient. One counselor struck the table. Commander, consider your oath. I am. Caelan lifted his chained hands and placed them over the command seal. For generations, every heir of House Thorne had sworn authority into that piece of silver. Soldiers obeyed its bearer, private hearths answered its mark. The seal held the accumulated weight of compulsory promises made by men who had never been free to refuse. Varek descended 1 step from the tribunal. Denounce Elara, confirm that she corrupted the First Moonhearth, and the council may preserve your rank. Caelan's gaze hardened. You still believe rank is the thing I fear losing. He turned toward the officers. By the authority remaining to me, I release every soldier of the Winter Guard from compulsory loyalty to House Thorne. The command seal burned white. Men throughout the hall staggered as the inherited bond broke inside them. Some clutched their chests, others dropped to one knee, not in submission but because choice had returned too suddenly. Caelan's face tightened with pain. Yet he continued. Emergency command passes to the civilian councils governing each refuge. My family's private heat reserves are to be opened and distributed among the dormant Moonhearth sites. You cannot transfer crown property, Varek said. It is not crown property. It was taken from settlements under protection contracts my house enforced. Caelan faced the scribes. Record that. No one moved. A young scribe reached for his pen. Others followed. Varek signaled the guards, but several hesitated. Their obedience was no longer bound to Caelan's seal or Varek's interpretation of it. Caelan used the last authority attached to his title to order the imprisoned engineers released. He gave them access codes to the sealed tunnels and named the locations copied from Elara's network map. Only when every order had been witnessed did he remove the command seal from his neck. I renounce my inheritance and all claim to leadership of House Thorne. The silver darkened in his palm. Varek's voice lowered. And what do you expect this performance to purchase? Nothing. Caelan placed the seal on the tribunal floor. Elara owes me no forgiveness. The Dominion owes me no honor. I am correcting what I can before judgment. He knelt not before Varek, but so the guards could replace his chains. Take me to trial. Hours later, the first released engineers reached the mountain through an abandoned thermal passage. They carried tools, maps, and sealed instructions bearing Caelan's name. Elara read the account of the hearing without expression. Oren waited beside her. He gave up everything. He gave back what should never have belonged to him. Is that enough? No. She folded the report carefully. But it is real. The engineers opened the mountain conduits. Far beneath Hollowmere and Dusford, dormant chambers answered with weak silver pulses as the Thorne heat reserves entered the buried network. Riven raised his head. For the first time since taking the Black Frost, his breathing eased. Then every silver line stopped at once. At the center of the map, one black lock remained, the hereditary command seal. Caelan had renounced its authority, but the generations of stored coercion inside it had not been released. A horn sounded from the entrance. Varek's soldiers had reached the mountain. Behind them came hundreds of starving civilians, their wrists tied with black ration cloth. Elara stared at the final sealed line and understood what the network required. Caelan would have to destroy the command seal himself, and Varek was bringing him to the mountain in chains. Varek expected Elara to barricade the First Moonhearth. Instead, she opened its outer doors. Cold wind swept into the entrance chamber as hundreds of starving civilians gathered beneath the mountain. Soldiers formed a black line behind them, spears lowered. At their center walked Varek in a fur-lined cloak, while Caelan followed in chains with the darkened command seal hanging from his bound hands. Oren stared at the open passage. Once they enter, we may not force them out. We are not defending a fortress, Elara said. We are proving no one should own it. She divided the engineers among the dormant conduits. Each received a copy of the network map, a witnessed record of Varek's crystal transfers, and one instruction. No oath would be accepted unless the speaker understood its cost and could refuse without losing shelter. Mara organized vow circles among the refugees. They were kept small, with no commanders, clan heads, or council officers speaking for others. Every person offered something specific: labor, food, medical care, watch duty, or protection of children. No one swore loyalty to Elara. That was the point. Riven moved between the circles despite the black frost beneath his fur. He smelled each vow before a hand touched stone. Twice he growled, and frightened speakers admitted that soldiers had threatened families outside the mountain. Those vows were not taken. Caelan watched from beside the entrance, guarded by men who had once obeyed him. Elara met his eyes only once. He had released his soldiers, his inheritance, and his private heat stores without knowing whether she would ever forgive him. She did not trust his promises. She trusted the consequences he had accepted. Varek entered the central chamber and looked around as though measuring walls he already considered his property. "You have filled a royal refuge with fugitives," he said. Elara stood before the Moonhearth. "You called this mountain solid stone until I found it. Discovery does not create ownership. Neither does emergency law." Varek raised one hand. Soldiers carried forward iron chests bearing stolen ward crystals. Hungry civilians watched the blue light glowing through the seams. "Food and heat will be distributed when lawful authority is restored," he announced. "Those who swear service to the Dominion will be protected." "To the Dominion?" Elara asked. "Or to you?" His expression did not change. "There is no difference during crisis." Elara touched the central conduit. Silver light climbed the walls and entered the aurora channels above the mountain. Across the chamber, images appeared in the air. Shipping dates, ration seals, engineer reports, and records showing that every failed settlement had resisted Varek's contracts. Gasps moved through the civilians. Varek looked upward. "Forgery. Then let the Hearth judge us." Elara stepped aside from the central platform. She had chosen the location carefully. According to the preserved vow imprints, the First Moonhearth did more than receive promises. It amplified their true nature through every connected refuge. Varek understood too late. His soldiers moved toward the platform, but the civilians blocked their path. Not with weapons, with bodies. "You promised food," one woman said. "My son froze outside your depot," another called. Varek drew the emergency seal from his cloak. "By authority of the Winter Council, every citizen present will swear that all heat, grain, labor, and refuge belong under central command until the storm has passed." The soldiers tightened their formation. Behind them, ration officers held bread where children could see it. One by one, desperate hands touched the platform. Elara felt the Moonhearth recoil. "Do not speak," she warned. Shelter is already yours. Varek lifted the bread higher. The first oath was spoken. Black frost erupted across the central stone. It entered the network faster than flame through dry grass. Silver lines darkened beneath Hollowmere, Dustford, and the river settlements. Engineers shouted from the conduit stations as frozen cracks split the walls. Varek smiled. If the Hearth cannot accept lawful command, then it is too dangerous to remain. Elara understood his final strategy. He did not need to control the network if he could destroy it and blame her. Close the eastern channel, she ordered. Separate the vow circles. The controls did not answer. The central platform was distributing Varek's coercion into every awakened refuge. Riven howled. Before Elara could reach him, the wolf leaped onto the stone. He lowered his muzzle over the spreading frost and drew the corruption into himself. Dark vapor poured beneath his fur. Riven, stop. He looked at her once. Silver eyes steady. Then he collapsed. Every line on the network map turned black. Deep beneath the Dominion, the forgotten hearths began freezing from within. Riven's body struck the stone, and the First Moonhearth went silent. Elara dropped beside him. Black frost covered his chest, throat, and muzzle. His heartbeat fluttered beneath her palm, barely stronger than the trembling floor. Around them, the awakened refuge lines were dying. Varek stepped toward the central stone. You see what her forbidden system has done. Submit now, and the crown may still preserve what remains. Elara looked at the starving civilians holding ration bread they had been forced to earn with obedience. The Hearth did not reject them, she said. It rejected you. Varek raised the emergency seal. They swore willingly. Hunger is not freedom. She placed both hands on the frozen platform. The vow imprints opened through her mind. Thousands of voices, separated by centuries but united by one law. No ruler could claim the only fire. No promise made beneath threat could sustain life. Elara turned toward the waiting circles. Withdraw every oath of loyalty. Fear moved through the chamber. A woman from Dustford lifted her hand from the stone. Then what do we promise? Only what you freely choose to give. The woman faced the people beside her. I will share my grain before another child starves. A silver spark appeared beneath her palm. Oren followed. I will keep public measure of every ration. Mara placed her hand beside his. I will tend the sick without asking their clan or rank. Across the network, engineers repeated Elara's instruction. The old loyalty language disappeared. In its place came specific promises of labor, shelter, food, truth, and mutual protection. Silver light returned in scattered pulses. But the central lock remained black. Elara looked at Caelan. He already understood. The guards released his chains when he stepped forward. No command forced them. They chose. Caelan carried the hereditary seal onto the platform. My house filled this with generations of obedience taken from people who could not refuse. Varek moved between them. Destroy it, and House Thorne ends. Caelan looked at Elara, not for permission, but so she would witness the choice. It should have ended the moment power became more sacred than the people it was meant to protect. He placed the seal against the frozen stone and drove his chained wrists downward. Silver cracked. The sound rolled through the mountain like thunder. The seal broke in half. Stored heat erupted from it, carrying the weight of countless compulsory oaths. Caelan fell as the force tore the command bond from his blood. The black lock shattered and fire raced through every buried line. Varek seized an iron tool and swung toward the central stone. Elara intercepted him. She caught his wrist, turned the blow aside, and drove the tool into the platform beside his hand. Black frost climbed instantly over his emergency seal. The Hearth displayed his true vow across the chamber. All survival shall depend upon me. The words burned above him in dark light. His soldiers lowered their weapons. Varek stared at them. I command you. No one moved. You fed us only when we surrendered, one officer said. You destroyed our wards, said another. The ration chests were opened. Crystals, food, and records were carried to the civilian circles, while Varek was bound beneath the evidence of his own oath. Elara returned to Riven. The wolf no longer breathed. She placed one hand over his heart and the other on the Moonhearth. He took what belonged to all of us, she said. Now we take it back together. Across every refuge, people repeated the promise. Not loyalty, responsibility. The black frost left Riven in thin streams and divided itself through thousands of truthful vows. Pain passed through every contributor, brief but real. No one was untouched. No one carried the burden alone. Riven gasped. His silver eyes opened. The first Moonhearth blazed. Beneath Hollowmere, Duskford, the river settlements, and forgotten villages, ancient doors opened. Water thawed, stone chambers warmed. No single ruler controlled the network because every refuge governed its own fire and shared only what it freely chose. Varek was tried for sabotage, coercion, and the deaths caused by the failed wards. Caelan confessed publicly and received no restored title. He was sentenced to rebuild the settlements his decision had endangered and remained permanently barred from military command. Months later, Elara found him repairing a heat conduit beneath Hollowmere. He did not ask whether she had forgiven him. I have finished the eastern line, he said. The council can inspect it before activation. She examined the work, then looked at the man who had once chosen order over her life. You may walk with me to the next refuge. It was not absolution. It was a beginning she chose. Above them, wolves howled from the thawing mountain, and hidden hearths answered across the dominion. Elara Vey stood as the first elected keeper of the network, not because a king had chosen her, but because she had returned survival to everyone.